Welcome back. I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Review. We are looking this week at a design with the title From Harvest Hall. It was made for an agricultural show, and the difference with this particular show is that they don't have a wall behind the floral art designs. So everything is staged on an open bench. As you can see from the image, there are designs on the other side of the bench to where this particular one is. So that means that we have to be a little bit careful about finishing off the design. And so I'll be interested to see how well the analysis looks at that particular part of the design. As with all of these designs in this series, these are ones from my previous competition activities. This one was about 4 or 5 years ago now, and we have had our AI design eye have a look at it in terms of the principles and elements of design and prepare some feedback for me, as well as some suggestions for improving the design. So the design itself there was 70 centimetres of width available and a height of unlimited. The basket that I've used is one that was gifted to me. It's a very large basket, but it's a great one because it's got lots of texture and it's a little bit different to the standard sort of basket. What I wanted to do with this design was have it look as though there was an abundance of material. Now the title, From Harvest Hall, is about the building that it's in as part of the agricultural show. So this hall also has the cooking, which you can slightly see behind there, and honey and eggs and all of the vegetable produce, the cut flower specimen competition, as well as some more related competitions, but not within the growing framework. So I wanted to incorporate all of the things that you might find in the hall itself in this particular design. So I've used the basket as the container. What I have to be careful of and you should always be careful of when using a basket, is not to allow the handle of the basket to limit your design. So here I've put the chrysanthemums are in a glass vase with some cork around the top to soften the edge of that glass. They come beyond the handle, as do the gourds and the wheat, so that it breaks up that limiting factor of the handle being across the top of the design. Within the basket itself, I've got lots of fruit and vegetables, so pumpkin, tomatoes, carrots, asparagus, potatoes I think as well are in there somewhere. And at the back of the design, just as a little hint of humour, there is a pseudo chicken. So and then there is wheat either side of the design. The design itself didn't place. I don't believe. I haven't looked back into my book to see, but I'm pretty sure it didn't place. And I suppose at the time I was a little bit irritated by the judge, who wanted everything to look like a flower arrangement that was formal and traditional, and she's not really as adept at the interpretive designs. And so I felt that although it was a good design, there are things in it that I would change, and I can see now, looking at it with a little bit of a disparate eye, that it is not as good as I thought it was on the day. And so it's probably reasonable to assume that she got it right. We won't argue with the judge. It doesn't do any good. So let's now have a look at the analysis that our AI Design Eye has provided and see what things I can do to improve the design. Looking at form, first of all, the overall form is encompassing and rounded, dictated by the strong structural hoop of the basket handle. Within this frame, there is a distinct contrast between the solid, heavy spherical forms of the produce and the elongated, tapering forms of the gourds. So what I've done is the dominant form in the design is provided by the basket and the handle, which is round, and I've repeated that form, but I've broken it up, so it's not just all round forms. The flowers are round, the tops of the carrots, the pumpkin, all the things that it's mentioned. The gourds have got some rounded element to them, but they're elongated, and the wheat itself is long, straight stems. So I've broken up the form with some contrast that makes and keeps the design interesting in that sense in terms of form. Texture. This design is a masterclass in varied textures, so it must have been from my time of textural dominance. The smooth glossy skins of the tomatoes and gourds contrast heavily with the rough chaotic root-like fringing at the base of the basket. The soft frilly petals of the chrysanthemums and the prickly dry husks of the wheat add further tactile interest. Texture, it is evident in the design. It's probably not as contrasting as I have had in some of the other designs that we've featured in this series. There's lots of textures there, but there's not, to my mind, they're not placed so that they contrast one against the other enough in the design. There's too much smooth altogether, and then there's areas where it's the rougher finishes, and they're all together. So I could have done better with mixing up the textures, juxtaposing textures next to one another, I think. Colour. The primary palette is rooted in warm, earthy harvest tones of deep oranges, varied greens and rustic browns. However, this is sharply interrupted by the stark bright white of the central chrysanthemums. And that's very true. And I think when I looked at this image the first time as it went to have its analysis, I thought, why did I use white flowers? Very rare for me to actually use white flowers, and it must have been that they were the only ones available at the time, or can't think why. Maybe I thought that would help with the chicken. The chicken wouldn't stand out quite as much if there was white flowers in it as well. But they really don't help the design. They just look completely out of place to me now that I look at it with the benefit of hindsight, shall we say. So line. Strong diagonal lines are introduced by the tall gourds and the stalks of wheat, which actively break through the circular line of the basket handle, creating movement and preventing the design from feeling entirely closed off. So this is very similar to the kind about form. And so we've got that rounded form evident all across the design, all through the design, but it's broken up by the straight lines and the strong diagonal lines from the stalks and from the top of the gourds. So always an idea to keep in mind, what is the line that you're looking for in your design, or what have you produced, what line have you produced in your design, and does it limit the design when you're looking at it? So an interesting exercise for you to do with some of your own designs. Space. The design utilises a very dense, packed spatial arrangement. There is very little negative space within the basket, which effectively communicates a feeling of overwhelming abundance and a bountiful harvest. Now, I particularly wanted this to be full of bounty, the things that were relevant to Harvest Hall. There is a tendency, I think, at the moment for us, and perhaps it's because of the cost of flowers, but there's a tendency to move towards more minimalist designs, having lots of negative space. That's appropriate and it's relevant when it reflects the class title in a competition. But if I had done this as a minimalist arrangement, it wouldn't give you the same sort of feeling of abundance and bounty in terms of harvest that I would hope to see in a competition of this nature in this environment where it's an agricultural show. Contrast. The most prominent contrast is thematic and material, with the rustic, unrefined agricultural elements placed directly alongside the highly refined, cultivated look of the white chrysanthemums in clear glass. And I guess my reaction to that is that that's a shame, because I really like contrast to be in textures, I like contrast to be in colour or in form, and I haven't in this design given enough of a contrast in any of those things which are principles and elements of design, but rather I've relied on my interpretation being the contrast, and that's very risky in a competition because, as was the case here, the judge might not see it. They might not see that was a design choice of contrast in terms of the perfect flowers and the more rustic agricultural elements that are in the design. You have to forgive my voice, I've got hay fever. There's nothing else wrong with me. Dominance and focal area. The bright white chrysanthemums completely dominate the arrangement. Because white advances visually and the mass is placed centrally, the eye is immediately drawn here before taking in the surrounding produce. And not only is this an important point for me to remember, but it's important for you to have in your arsenal as well. White, as it says, will always be a dominant part of a design. So if you're going to use white, you have to ensure that that's where you want the eye to be drawn, and then you've got to have a path for the eyes to move through the design. I don't have a path in this design. I've got you drawn to the white, and even when I'm looking at the image now, I'm drawn to the white, and I don't really see the rest of the design unless I'm looking for something in particular in terms of this analysis. I think that it would have been different had the chicken been a little bit more observable, because there would have been white down in the design, so you would have been drawn from the flowers down to the chicken and then around the base of the design. But the placements are not right, and there's too many flowers. Even half that number would still give me the idea of that perfection in the grown element that's there against the rustic vegetables and fruits that are there. I just don't need that many, and I don't need the mass there, and they're not repeated anywhere else. Balance. The design utilises asymmetrical balance. The visual weight and physical height of the large brown gourds on the left are somewhat counterbalanced by the bright visual weight of the floral mass in the centre, though the piece still leans slightly heavy to the left. It does. If you draw an imaginary vertical line down through the middle of the design, then you do have most of the white on one side, but then you've got very much visual weight on the left-hand side where you've got the gourds, the wheat, and the pumpkin at the base. And so that's not as balanced as it should be. And there are a number of things I could have done with the design. But I think part of it is that the things that are in the basket themselves are too low down. I needed to bring them higher up, away from the edge of the basket, so that they covered the glass vase, and they were more of a draw card than the vase and the flowers themselves. Proportion and scale. While the vegetables are scaled well to the oversized rustic basket, the central glass vase feels slightly out of proportion and out of character for the surrounding materials. And I think that's true. And I think that just what I said just then about bringing material up around the glass vase so that perhaps all you could see was the lip of it, where the cork is, and that would blend in with the basket as well. That would have really helped this design and given it much, it enhanced the bountiful nature of it by being able to see all of that wonderful produce, but also filled that space a bit better. It's a little bit empty. It's almost like I didn't quite have enough material to fill out the space, and so I've sort of put it in as best I can, but it's too sparsely spread. You know, it's too little Vegemite for too much toast, as we say in this household. So let's now have a look at some of the suggestions that our AI Design Eye has made for us. First of all, it has reminded me about the overall interpretation in terms of this design. So when you're designing for an agricultural show where public viewing is high and the theme is so heavily tied to the land, maintaining a cohesive aesthetic is crucial. And so now it's got a few ideas for refinement. So very important for you to remember not just that you're doing a design and you've done your interpretation, but what is the venue? What will be, in terms of judges, yes, it's going to be judged, but you also want people to appreciate the effort and the work that you've put in. So it's important, I think, to think about the venue as well as thinking about the judging and all the other things that we think about when we're putting our designs together. So suggestion 1 is harmonising the container. The clear glass vase holding the chrysanthemums is fully visible and visually clashes with the rustic harvest theme. Concealing this water source, perhaps by sinking a plastic container inside a hollowed out gourd, wrapping it in a hessian or burlap, or utilising a textured ceramic pot would immediately elevate the thematic cohesion. That's very true, and as I talked about earlier, I think if I just brought some of the fruit and vegetables up higher, I still could have used that vase, because I think I needed it for the support and height for the chrysanthemums that I had there. I wouldn't use a ceramic pot because I don't think that that will blend itself in as well either. But I would perhaps use, even if I had piled up some oranges and hollowed out one of the oranges and had the water source inside the orange so that it looked like the flowers were coming out of the orange, still had a clean water source, then that would have helped. The design would have all fitted in together much more easily than it does now. I think it's very true that the glass vase does create a jarring effect because it's just so out of place with the rest of the design. Number 2 is colour cohesion. The stark white of the chrysanthemums is quite jarring against the warm autumnal tones of the vegetables. Swapping the white blooms for something in a warm, analogous palette, such as bronze, orange chrysanthemums, rich yellow sunflowers, or vibrant zinnias, would create a much more unified and harmonious colour story. I think, personally, that the chrysanthemums are the wrong choice of flower. I don't think that having them in a bronze or an orange or a yellow would help. I think they're just the wrong kind of flower. And I think now looking at it, perhaps something that's a little bit more natural in terms of its growth, like zinnias or poppies if they are in season, just something that has a bit more sculptural flow to it, would help with bringing everything together, and not white. Definitely not white. Go for something that is in the other colours that are already in that collection of fruits and vegetables. Grouping and editing. There's a vast array of materials. Grouping similar items together creates a stronger visual impact. That's very true, and I think that what I've done there is, as I said earlier, is I think I've realised that I didn't have enough, that the basket is bigger than I remember it always when I use it. It's always, I get to the point where I think, there's still more I've got to fill out. And so I think I just needed more material. I needed a range of other materials. So I think the potatoes would have worked really well because they're brown, but they've got a little bit of dirt on them. So definitely a harvesting type of plant material to use. And grouping them together, I think, massing them together would work significantly better than having them scattered across the rest of the design. And number 4, walking the design. Now, we've started to talk about this in all of the videos that we're putting out because it's a good way for you to put yourself in the judge's position, particularly for this competition where the judge is going to approach it from either side. He's going to walk down and up the bench and have a look at the other designs that are in that class. So what it's saying is, as always, walking the design is essential, especially in a busy hall where the public and judges might view the piece from oblique angles, ensuring that the beautiful produce isn't just piled in at the front, but that the textures and materials flow cleanly around the sides and back onto a true 360-degree finish. Now, although it says it's being judged from the front, you do get an impression from the sides and you do look through it. So you've got to look through it and know that the material is repeated through the design, so you get a good 3D effect and you get the balance of the design through that way. So it's very important to take off your competitor hat at some point and put on your judge's hat and walk up and down and around the design as much as you can and make sure that it's got interest from every angle. Even though it's not going to be judged from every angle, it still needs to look like it's complete. Well, that's our analysis for the design from Harvest Hall for this week. As always, I'll encourage you to visit Floral Art Review and use your own designs, get an analysis, get these suggestions, and think about the things that you can do with your designs to lift them out of the area that they're in now and move them forward and move you on your journey in floral art. Until next week, I'm Kim Bailey, and this is Floral Art Review.